It was like 2 or 3 hours of just solid paperwork, and that was really an uneventful first day.
When did things get weird? When did you realize? Like, at what point in time did you say, "Hey, this is not"?
For several reasons, they do this on all classified projects, so nobody has the complete story. But they compartmentalize everything. Now, we had the power and propulsion system. So what the briefings they gave me were like a 1 or 2 page overview of some of the other projects that were going on.
So when you're reading that, before you actually saw the reactor, what were your thoughts on what they were describing? If you knew that something like that didn't exist, and they're describing it in the briefings, what did you think you were going to see?
I didn't know at the time. I mean, I was reading, I thought, is this some kind of test?
See if you're crazy?
Well, not to see if I'm crazy, to, a lot of times they'll take in real high security items meet. It's a really weird looking thing, but there was almost nothing other than a small foldable hatchway that looked recognizable. Everything. According to Barry, there was an attempt made. Now, this must have been a pretty desperate attempt because it's not a very scientific process to analyze something that way. But it looked like they used a plasma cutter or something like that to cut into an operating reactor.
How many of these things did they have?
They had 9. Nothing happened with what we're dealing with. We have no idea how the physics operate within this thing. The power levels are like I said, astronomical. Like, it's incredibly dangerous to tinker with something like that. And, in some respects, we were guinea pigs, just try to find out how to make this thing.
So they had a
test. The high performance test goes above the mountain range, and they do much more radical moves with the thing. Look, this is a prized item, and they're not doing anything like taking it out of the atmosphere or flying around to other countries or anything like that. They just play with this thing right over the test site. Went home, and Zeta Reticuli is a binary star. 2 stars that orbit one another, and it's only visible in the southern hemisphere, and it's about 30 some odd light years away. So that's literally all the information I have about that. I don't know how they found out it came from there.
And you also probably have some suspicions that they give you some disinformation, like you were talking about before, where they would if you ever decided to talk about this, they added a bunch of nonsense to make whatever is factual look ridiculous.
Right. Or be able to trace it down. Like, hey, this fax came out, and this Lazar guy said it came from Zeta Reticuli, so they knew it would
when
be
you
me.
read Zeta
And
right.
crazy information, and then it would. But like I said, when I finally went in with Barry, and had hands-on experience with what they were talking about, it took on a completely different meaning.
So there's a plate, there's this thing that looks like a half a basketball, and when it's on, you can't come anywhere near it. You can't touch it.
Right.
What is gravity about that? Like the concept of gravity, to most people, is gravity is bringing something towards it.
Right. Well, I guess you would say it.
Right?
Yeah, but remember, this is it's in the dark in the 80s with a big monster-sized camcorder, and you got, a bright light jumping around. But, we did video of it, but there's no, by today's standards, it's...
But is your video specifically available, the video that you took?
Yeah, well, George Knapp has it.
Is it online?
I give it down.
Do you know?
I have no idea.
To see how his video looks now, but as far as video evidence, we are talking 80s camcorders. The most important thing is the human story here. Everybody that he took up there on 3 separate occasions, they don't all like each other. They don't all talk. They all agree on one thing. They saw something that did he know. You can dismiss him. I tried to dismiss it, but some things we can't get around, and there's about 5 or 6 of them. How did he know about those?
If Jamie wants to find that video right now, what would he look under?
Bob Lazar, UFO, S4, Area 51, just kind of like that. So it's like the S for UFO video, Bob Lazar, and a guy does an analysis, but you're analyzing these 80s videos.
Right.
He from the very beginning, Bob never said, I have proof of my story and I'm going to tell the world. He said at the very Admiral Wilson met with a scientist who's actually was featured in one of my films. Everybody has been debating whether or not this document of a conversation with a sitting admiral at the time is a real document. It's an actual conversation that happened, and this document is real. Everybody wants to know. The world is going crazy right now in the UFO world. I'll tell you straight.
Human
Is
volunteers.
that-
No.
I just wanted to make sure that was it. Yeah.
No, that's not it.
Okay.
Yeah. So Admiral Wilson meets with this scientist, and they have this discussion, oddly enough, at special projects at EG&G. And if I remember, the document is from 2001. I'm telling everybody right now, it's real, and we'll see my history.
What is said in that document specifically?
It's between a scientist and an admiral that are sitting, and they're having a meeting, and they're talking about the search for the UFO subject, the search to get special access program access to all of these different things like reverse engineering programs. So talks about this process. The big thing I get from it, and a lot of it's vindicating to Bob, and one of the things that's vindicating besides the EG&G thing, is that private industry. So this guy's an admiral, and he says, government funded. It's just one of those things that kind of shakes you, because you got this military guy who can't get access because of the private industry that's holding these non-terrestrial materials that they can't study.
Any other government had something similar?
No, nothing that I had heard.
See, that was the thing that always freaked me out, was why, if something was so superior to human beings, it's almost like visiting an ant colony. Like, why would you go to the Queen? I don't give a fuck who the Queen.
If it was archaeological.
Well, one of the more recent sightings and these discussions that have been coming out recently from Air Force pilots and Navy pilots, they've been talking about things happening in the ocean. And that something literally goes into the water, or something maybe below the
You're
surface
thinking
of the
about
water.
the 2014, well, Commander Fravor and those pilots, there was a disturbance on the surface of the water. Commander Fravor visually saw what looked like similar to a cross, some object. So it's like as if you have some like coral under the water and it's breaking over.
Right.
The Tic Tac is. Not only does it's definitive that it's not conventional anything by its movements, but there's a pocket of cold air around a propulsion source. So this object, by the way, sat stationary for days, if not weeks. It sat stationary.
Yeah, they found it 11 hours later, and they were saying there's no way this thing, using that kind of energy to go that fast, could just
Right.
hover for
The amount of
11
time.
hours.
And by the way,
Watching this thing. But, one of the things I think in the gimbal video, the way the craft that we worked on flies is it doesn't fly like a conventional aircraft does, and it doesn't fly. I mean, it may land on the wheels, but at some point when it wants to leave, flips up, points the wheels where it wants to go, and takes off. And the gimbal video, you can see the craft do the roll maneuver, and it's really interesting. It behaves exactly like the craft that I worked on.
So
Power source.
they all have the same power source. And we're also dealing with, if you think about the laws of technological progression, you think of Moore's law and you think of how things accelerate, you've got to think that if this civilization is who knows how many years more advanced than we are, if not even years. I mean, we're thinking about it in terms of conventional terms, right? The way we look at the world. I mean,
they started experimenting with. And the version of their steam engine, their first product, was something that operated like this. And actually, when they came to Earth to look around, or whatever, they were amazed at the stuff we were doing. These guys burn. Change is magnificently higher than it used to be.
right. So if you think about what they had in 1988 and you think about what they probably have in 2019, just logically seems like they would advance.
I would think so.
The only question is, like, are they living? Was it Boston Dynamics at the company
You
that's
can
making all
make
those
robots,
crazy
yeah.
robots? Yeah.
You can make machines out of flesh,
Yeah,
right? So
right.
a cyborg or a cybernetic organism is just that, that's what a lot of people think those like gray things are, that people call the grays.
Yeah.
Is like they're machines
Right.
printed from flesh. So what you're saying is like not
Well, they
so
could just
far
be
off.
No.
synthetic.
That's also our bottleneck, right? Our bottleneck is our biological imperative. The need to breed, emotions, fear, anxiety, all these different things that exist in order to force us into making sure we reproduce. Some sort of thing that doesn't have these biological limitations that we have.
By the way, these craft, all these different kinds have been reported because it was confusing. I always thought of flying saucers what I heard Bob Lazar talk about, flying saucer, right? But if you look back in history, people have always reported the weirdest shapes. Like none of them are alike. There are the saucers, but you got cigar shaped, you got the top hat shaped, you have orbs. Why? Maybe they're serving different purposes. They're doing different things like we'd use different tools. And I want to be tasks, and that's
Well,
why.
they seem, if you think about what an alien is in terms of our the sort of iconic image of an alien, like the Steven Spielberg Close Encounters of the Third Kind alien, they seem like what we'd assume a human being would eventually become.
Right.
And if these things are tiny, human beings are smaller than they've ever been before. They're weaker than they've ever been before, and there seems to be a trend in that direction. And this trend's innovation. If you looked at this species from afar, and if you weren't a part of it, you would say, well, what does this species do? Oh, they make things. They make things better every year. Beehives are the same fucking thing that you see 10 years ago. You go by, you see a beehive, it's amazing, it's cool, but they're the same
Right.
fucking thing. They figured out how to do it, they make a beehive.
Right.
We don't do that. We make better things.
What would you do?
Technology that's
What would you do if you were a hyper intelligence, right? Would you do the work yourself, or would you create some cool things called like humans to do it for you? Would you create things that are cybernetic organisms to come in with machines and do it for you? If you were a hyper intelligence that has kind of changed like you've described, you'd probably create workers, right?
Well, that's a vast conspiracy theory.
I'm not talking about conspiracy.
But it is a kind of a conspiracy,
I'm
right? Like,
asking you.
well, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily that. I mean, you could look at it that way, but that is the way a conspiracy theorist would look at it. The way I would look at it is like there's obviously a progression going on, a biological progression. There's some capable. Everyone has it. And I think it's attached to materialism in some sort of a strange way because so many people work so hard to get new things. And like, God, that seems so illogical and preposterous and it makes people unhappy and depression's on the rise, but nobody seems to be able to stop it. Like, why is that? And if you examine all the information that you've said today, if you look at all the things that the detractors have said, if you look at all of the new recent evidence that's coming out and all these really high-level people in the military and the government that are discussing this, it gives you far more credibility than you would have had in the 1980s
Sure.
when this came out.
Fuck yes, you can't.
And let people know. And like I said, I don't want to say I'm a fan of yours, but I guess I'm a fan of yours. As a human being, I'm a fan of yours. But I've been following you for decades. I've been following the story for decades. I mean,
No kidding. Oh.
I have VHS tapes
Bob,
at
like
home.
a lot of the world has.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, anybody
You don't
that
get it.
has any sort of a vested interest or
I just want
What
to
do
hear
you wanna
him.
hear from
I
him?
want to hear him say. I want them to
Why
hear
do I
him.
have to say that?
You don't.
Joe just said
we
it.
get
yeah.
it.
I step out.
Okay.
Settle down. Yeah, I get it. It was hard for you to get him here, and I
It was
appreciate.
hard for us. You
Well, you did a lot more
what
than me.
what really annoys though, no, that if you think somehow we came up with this thing, then you got to tell me why we did it.
Well, you've done a great job of making sure you have your bases covered in that regard, that you haven't profited off of this, and like you said, that you have donated whatever money that came your way to science programs. It doesn't make any sense any other way. I mean, what I've gotten out of here is what I thought I was going to get out of here when I watched the documentary. That what you're saying makes sense. It doesn't make sense that it's bullshit.
That happened exactly like I said it did, Joe.
I believe you. In closing, is there anything else you'd like to say?